Hi, everybody. My name's John Meekins. I'm coming at you live from Ocala, Florida. Some of you know me, and some of you don't. I've been working in the criminal justice system. I've been working for one of the largest women's prisons in the country for close to 12 years. And over that time, I've really come to understand a lot about, what brings women to prison. There's like a path to prison. Sorry, I got a couple cats here, so I know that people like cat videos. So if you see one walk by, I guess that'll be, it'll help me build my audience. But I'd like to stress that, when I start talking about this stuff, I'm not trying to, really, I'm not really trying to criticize one agency or not one agency or whatever, but I feel like everywhere that I've been all over the world talking about human trafficking in correctional institutions, and I can tell you, hey Amy, how are you? Anyway, when you go anywhere you go in the world that I've been to jails and prisons all over the place, and it always starts out where somebody says, hey, it doesn't go on here, and then as soon as I leave, you know what happens? All of a sudden they say, They call me back. Oh, there's one of my cats. He's pretty nice. That's Cozy. But you'll see one of my cats, and you'll see, I'll see somebody, and I'll talk to them, and they'll say, hey Rick, how are you doing? Are you guys able to hear me? Okay. But anyway, I'll go to different places around the world, and I've talked to a lot of people. And all of a sudden, they swear up and down they don't have issues with human trafficking. They're women. They don't have those types of issues. But everywhere I've been, they do. Eventually they start looking around and they're like, hey, we do have problems with prostitution. We do have problems with, women being walked out of the door by people that shouldn't be taking them home. So anyway, if you're kind of new and you really don't know me very much, I'm just going to talk a little bit about, what I've done. But like I said, I'm going to not talk about where I work because I have people that watch me and they don't want me, talking about them. But, I got a bachelor's degree from a really good business school, the Wharton School, the University of Pennsylvania. And so people always say, hey, wow, you're really smart. What are you doing working in a prison? Well, that's a really long story that I don't really have time to go into. I'm also a member of some gang investigators association groups. I'm a member of the International Association of Human Trafficking Investigators, and so I'm kind of like one of those people where I really get interested in stuff, and I tend to go overboard when I find something interesting, and so anyway. I've always liked criminal, hey Amelia, I've always liked criminal justice, and I really like sociology, and I like economics and that sort of thing, and so I've done a lot of presentations over the years. I've done a lot of speaking about human trafficking, and the reason that I got into human trafficking, that's kind of a long story too, but just some of the places that I've been, I've advised like the Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force on human trafficking. I've been to Tampa. I did the very first presentation in the history of the American Correctional Association on human trafficking. I've been with the Florida Attorney General's office on speaking on human trafficking. I go to human trafficking conferences all over the world, or all over the country. I've trained. About a year and a half ago, I met Annie Lobert. She's from the group Hookers for Jesus, and we did a presentation for a pretty cool group called the for the anti what is it? The group is called the lie detection people. Anyway, I forget the name of the association. But anyway, I've been to the McCain Institute for Leadership. I've trained the LA County Jail. So there's not a whole lot of places that I haven't done it. And so anyway, people will say, well, hey, what are you talking about human trafficking in jails and prisons? It's just, it sounds crazy. And, initially it did sound crazy, but couple years, I used to go to these gang investigator groups, and people always used to say, oh wow, you work at a gang, you work with gangs, and you work in a prison. Wow, that's awesome. They're like, wow, you must be like up to your eyeballs in gangs, and like they'd be all excited and stuff. And I'd say, yeah, I'm up to my eyeballs in gangs. I work with them all day long. And they say, well, where do you work? And I say, well, I work at the women's prison up the road. And they're like, oh, you work at the women's prison. All of a sudden, they would like roll their eyes and they walk away. You know, it's like they're not real gangbangers or whatever. But you know, it's really funny because you know, come to find out, you know, women have a lot bigger role in gangs than a lot of people are ever going to admit. You know, the criminal justice system, if you work in a prison, like in women's prison, they don't take it seriously at all. So you like me to speak at the Porthole of Justice? Yeah, you know, I'm willing to speak anywhere, to go to any groups. But, you know, what was really kind of interesting is in 2012, I went to, I found this conference. They were listed on the internet. And hey, how you doing, Tammy? So anyway, how's everybody out in New Mexico? So anyway, I think this is backwards, but there's this group called the International Association of Human Trafficking Investigators, and they're like a really cool group. And I know that online, I know that it's like it's backwards, but I went and I took a class with them, and it was like a 2-day course. And what was really neat about them is they were like all law enforcement and stuff, and they were prosecutors, and they were from all over the world. And one of the things that was really kind of embarrassing for me is, you know, I'd always been to a lot of these gang investigator conferences, and when you go to the gang things, oh, sorry, that's just one of my cats. So there I get a little, I get, you know, people that like cat videos. I think my rating just went up. But anyway, you know, when I was going to the gang stuff, you know, it was all like law enforcement and prosecutors and stuff like that. But yeah, a Sphinx. I have like 4 Sphinx cats, so you're gonna see some of those. They're very animated, and you know, they'll get up in my face, and there's like really no getting away from them. But you know, I went to the Florida Gang Investigators Association stuff, and it's like all cops and prosecutors. But you know, I remember the first time that I went to the the first time that I went to the the human trafficking groups, you know, I was expecting the same kind of crowd, you know, like they're all like cops and you know, locking up the bad guys and beating the crap out of the bad guys and stuff like that. But when I went to the human trafficking groups, I was really kind of surprised because, you know, there are like a lot of you know, when I went to the human trafficking groups, there were like pastors there, and there was a pastor that was he gave like a little sermon at the beginning. He gave a speech. And his name was Pastor Bill Lazaro, and he's from a church down in Clearwater, in the Clearwater area in St. Pete. And it was really funny because, you know, initially, like, I rolled my eyes, like, oh, God, here we go with the, you know, Jesus stuff, right? And all of a sudden, you know, he started speaking, and he talked about his first experience with human trafficking. And all of a sudden, it ignited a spark in me, you know, and I didn't really expect that. And so, yeah. I can get into what I do. I'm going to get into what I do in the jails and the prisons. But anyway, I came back from this conference, and, you know, I learned from all these people from all over the world. And there were people that were like, every time that, you know, they were all the people that took a class. And the first time they took a class, they went back to work and they found human trafficking going on, right? And I was the very first person that ever went to a human trafficking conference, like for law enforcement, that was a corrections officer. And, you know, I was the only one that ever kept going. And I kept going and I kept going. And I was still the only one that ever kept going to these human trafficking conferences. And the very first time I went back to this from work, you know, after this human trafficking conference for 2 days, I went and I talked to the inmates. Yeah, I work in this women's prison, and there's like, you know, hundreds of women. And I stood up in this dormitory and I said, you know, hey, I just got back from this human trafficking conference, and it was really interesting. And I said, I know that some of you guys have probably been through some of that stuff, or you know something about human trafficking and the forced prostitution. And I said, you know, no, I wouldn't. Yeah, I'm not gonna spread your business all over the world. But you know, if you want to pull me to the side and talk to me about it, you know, that'd be really cool, right? And let me tell you what. So I said that to about 100 women, and next thing I know, women are coming out of the woodwork and they're telling me all about their experiences of being forced into prostitution. You know, they have these pimps, and they've been in prison like 3 times because of the same guy. And I'm sitting there like, oh my God, why didn't you say something before? You know, do you need help or something? And, you know, they say, well, you know, I'd love help, but it's really tough to get out of this, you know, because, you know, they threaten my kids. You know, they'll say, hey, let's go see your mom. And then, you know, it's like, and then, you know, the traffickers and the pimps, you know, they spend a lot of time getting to know these girls. And a lot of the time, the biggest problem that we have with the women that come to prison, you know, we have a lot that come to prison, and they're coming behind their pimps but, you know, I just learned from the language that you don't just walk up to an inmate. Yeah, I've had other inmates will point out an inmate that has a tattoo, and they'll say, hey, that tattoo on that girl's neck, that's the name of her pimp. And her pimp, you know, they're all from the same neighborhood, and I know him from the street, and he puts her out there all the time, and he pimps her, and that's his little symbol on her neck or on her back. And then, you know, you would look online, and you're seeing that she's got like 15 prostitution charges, and they're all in the same neighborhood. And then, and so, you know, maybe I would go talk to that woman, and I'd say, hey, you know, is that the name of your pimp on your back? And all of a sudden, that's like the wrong thing to say, because that's not her pimp. In her opinion, that's her boyfriend, you know. And so it's something that, you know, I've really learned how to speak to the, you know, I've learned, and, you know, I've learned how to talk to them, and I don't talk to them in front of everybody, you know, and it's got to be pretty confidential, because, you know, if somebody sees you talking to, if some of the other inmates see them talking to me, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, you know, she's squealing, or she's snitching. And so, you know, you got to be very, very tactful in how you do it. And, you know, that's my advice to people, you know, that work in, like I say, most of my training that I deal with, it's with women, you know, it's in a correctional institution. And so, what's really sad is that there's not really a whole lot of people that are trained in it. And they say, well, you know, you should have like 2 people at all times, you know, speaking to these women, because you never know. But, you know, it's tough, because a lot of times there's nobody else around. Or, you know, a lot of times they don't trust anybody else. Sometimes if there's a mental health woman, there's some mental health people I know pretty well, and I'll bring them into their office, and we'll talk to them there. But it's a really tough place, because, you know, if you start putting their name out there and it gets left around on an incident report or something like that, and then the other inmates know, and it gets back to the pimp, you know, that could be a bad situation. And so, you know, it's really amazing, because, you know, right after I did that, you know, I'm telling you, like, whenever I started talking to these women about, hey, you know, I'm interested in hearing about human trafficking. If you ever had that situation, I'd like to hear about it, or whatever. You know, one day an inmate, she came up to me, and she said, you know, I've had a pimp for like 15 years. And she's like, would you like to see some letters, like mail from him? And I'm like, you're darn right, I'd like to see some mail from a pimp, right? And now there's certain language that we're not supposed, you know, if we're like advocacy groups, I know the language. Sometimes it's, you know, we're not supposed to call them pimps. We're supposed to call them traffickers, or we're supposed to call them, yeah, we're not supposed to really call them pimps, because a lot of times in the human trafficking world, the pimp is like a glorified thing. If you go online and you'll see some of these guys that, you know, in these rap videos and stuff, that's what they're about. You know, it's like, well, yeah, hey, I'm a pimp, and I'm making all this money, and you're seeing this stuff like Pimp My Ride, and that sort of thing. And so sometimes it's not really something that that we really want to glorify. But to me, you know, a trafficker is kind of like all-inclusive. You know, it includes the buyer, it includes the person that's driving somebody to the appointment and dropping them off. So, you know, when you start talking about pimps, and you know, pimps kind of narrows it down for me. So like I say, I don't want to be disrespectful. And then also, you know, people say they have issues with the fact that I call some of the women victims. They say, well, those are victims that you're dealing with. They're not. They're survivors. They're not victims. But the fact is too many times these women are being dropped off by pimps. It's like they're dropped off at the prison or they're dropped off at a county jail. And if you think about it, if we're not giving these women any kind of services or anything, they're not getting services, and we're just like warehousing them for a few weeks, and that's all we're doing, and we're not getting them some job training. We're not showing them, hey, there's a better way. And then when she's done with her sentence after 6 weeks in a county jail, and she's getting right back into the car with the same guy that when she got busted, because she got busted for possession of some kind of drugs or something. And so, or too many times she got busted for prostitution. And so now, because she was holding that guy's drugs for him, or maybe she got in a fight with the guy, and, so somebody called the cops, and now she's in jail for, domestic violence. And so a lot of times, there's charges that people have that, this is my little, thing. It's called seethegirl.org. And like I say, it's backwards, and I'm not sure why it's backwards, but if you guys could go to that website, they're pretty good. But they're a pretty good fundraising group. But it's just really kind of amazing some of the things that you'll see in some of these prisons, and the fact that they really don't want to rehabilitate these women because they don't have the time, or they don't have the money, or they don't have the training, they don't have the resources, and so that's something that I've been really after. The criminal justice system to really kind of step up. Another issue that I found is, we get these women and they come in for 2-3 years and they don't get any services. I talk to them and they say, hey, I really want to take a class. I really want to get educated. I want to take a class. I want to get my degree, my GED or whatever. And then all of a sudden you're sitting there talking to them, and it's like, well, let's go talk to the education people. And they say, well, we don't have enough space. She's got too much time, or her scores aren't high enough. And so anyway, that to me, that's really tragic, and so there's a group of us and there's a group of people and we got together and we started identifying people and some of the issues associated with reentry and some of the problems that they have as far as getting out of prison, and what forces them to go back into that life. You know what I'm saying? It's funny because for years, I had this one guy who was picking up women, and he was picking these women up nonstop, right? And I kept pointing out to the prison. I said, to the officials, I said, have you seen this guy's criminal history? And they're like, and the criminal history of this guy that was picking up women, he was picking these women up constantly, right? And these are the charges that this guy had. And this is public record. I'm not telling you anything that, that it's like super secret. But, this guy had been in prison. He'd been in prison, not just, accused, but he'd been in prison for, sexual battery, unspecified. That was in 1969. In 1973, he went to prison for strong-arm rape. In 1982, he went for sexual assault and battery. He went to prison for kidnapping a child, kidnapping a minor for ransom. And so this is a guy that's picking up women. But then, I'd say, well, and then they're all showing up on these escort websites when they get out of prison. And, people will say to me, and it's not just them, but they'll say, hey, if that's what they want to do, that's what that's what they're going to do. We can't do anything once they leave. But, if you got somebody that's coming to prison and they're doing 5 years in prison and all they're doing is sleeping through prison and they're not really getting much out of it, you're not helping them, get a trade. You're not helping them get a job. You're not giving them work skills. And you're not helping them, learn to not have to do that for a living. Well, then the fact of the matter is how do you know that's what they want to do? Is that their only choice? And so those are kind of some of the things that I deal with. And, I've dealt with. In some way, we started a really kind of a cool book project a while back. And a lot of you have done a really great job. I mean, I cannot believe all the women that the women that are getting these books, they're absolutely ecstatic that they're getting brand new books, because now they're able to take their education into their own hands. They're not reliant on somebody that says, hey, sorry, there's not enough people, or there's too many people in the class, or we don't have somebody to train you. They don't have to worry about that. Now we're making these available, and it's thanks to a lot of donations from like people that are total strangers that they're never going to meet. And what it really shows these women that are in prison is, a lot of them, they're in the deepest parts of their life. If you wind up in prison, I can't think of anything sadder than being in prison. It's like you talk about the deepest, saddest part of your life. And just the fact that they're getting these great books is like a really blessing. And what it says to them is, a lot of times, the prison people, or a lot of times the criminal justice system reinforces to these people when they go to prison, hey, you're a piece of crap, and we're going to treat you like one, and we're going to remind you every day that you're in prison that you're a piece of crap, right? And then just to remind them that they're a piece of crap, they're going to give them piece of crap equipment. They're going to put them in broken down dormitories. They're going to put them in broken down, get them in broken down equipment that's, that's worn out from the elementary school, because they built a new elementary school, and the elementary school didn't want the crap that they, and so now they get it, right? Or, here's some food that's like really horrible food, and so you want some horrible food? Knock yourself out. Here's some horrible food. Nobody at the hospital wanted to eat it because it's rotting, and so now we're going to serve it to the women at the prison or whatever. And so, they get that attitude, and then all of a sudden, they live up to those expectations. But, thanks to a lot of these really generous people that have been donating these books to the women in the prison, they're donating brand new GED books and things like that. The women are actually, there's a psychological effect to that, because what it says to them, it says, hey, I'm not a piece of crap. I'm just in a bad spot. And there are people out there, total strangers, who are never going to meet me, and somebody actually believes in me. Somebody has given me hope. And so when we get these books to these people, they're actually able to take their sobriety, and they're able to take their take their lives into their own hands, and they're able to say, hey, I'm going to make a choice not to have to go back to that lifestyle, and I'm going to get my education, and then I'm going to take a class where I can maybe get some kind of training. And when so we started to identify some of the areas where some of the places where people can get an education, and then they can use those skills to get decent jobs outside of prison. Too many times, these women, they're going to prison, right? And then they get out, and it's like, well, you don't qualify for anything. The only thing you qualify for is you just qualify to pick up a weed eater, and you wash dishes at some crappy place, or something like that. But it's really cool, because some of the books that we got, we've gotten a lot of really good GED books, and they're brand new. And I really want to show you some of these books, some of the books that we've gotten. But we got a thank you note from one of these women, and I really want to show you what the thank you note says. And I'd like to read it. This is on my computer, and I hope you can see it. But this says that I hope that this letter reaches you in good health and good spirits. I want to thank you for believing in me when I don't have nobody out there besides me. While I'm going through this hard time in my life. Well, anyways, I'm writing you to say I got my GED. Yay. Getting a GED, that's like a huge, huge, huge thing for women, right? For somebody that really didn't have anything before that, right? And then she said, I did it thanks to you and all the books that you sent me to study with. And you, and what you are doing for women like me really is a blessing, because all I know is people that that were only around for what they could get, sex being one. It says, my goal when I'm in here is to get as much education and knowledge as I can before leaving. And so, when I get stuff like that, and and I hope that the people that are donating the books and they're seeing that, hey, your money's not going to waste. Somebody is actually benefiting from that. I've had another letter that I got that was a thank you note, and I'd really like to show it to you, because it is pretty important, because education, I believe, transforms lives and it saves lives. But I want to show you this note, and it talks about change, right? And this was given to me, right before somebody walked out of prison, and she said, "Don't read this till I'm gone," or whatever. But it said, "So how does it feel to help save someone's life?" And oh, thanks, Amy. And so anyway, I really believe, I've always been a big believer in education and putting my money where my mouth is. And I've always encouraged these women to get education while they're there. And this is a really neat thank you note, because she said, "This is to tell you thank you for taking the time to make a difference in my life. I feel like I've been given a real chance at a normal life. And if nothing else, you saved at least one person," right? And so anyway, she said, "You made a difference. I can't thank you enough. When I think of how different my life would have been, all the horrible things that I would have gone back to, I hope you continue to stand out and keep the courage not to back down. Some girls do want to be saved, and by divine appointment, you helped change my life. There has to be more to life than this, and I'm going to find it." So, when you guys donate some of these books, when you guys are out there and you're sitting there saying, "Well, I don't know, maybe I should get my wallet and get it out, and maybe I'm just wasting my time, or that book looks kind of dumb, or maybe it doesn't, there's so many books on this list, and and if you go to my website is I'll put up a link, and my website, if you go, there's like an Amazon wish list. And if you click the wish list, right, now these books aren't for everybody, right, but it might be something in there that you might think would be kind of cool. Positive parenting. A lot of the women, they want to be great parents when they get out. They might not be parents there, but maybe they had a kid in prison, and then when they get home, they're going to be, they're going to get their kids back. Some way, then you can go down and you can look at, an inmate's anger management and inmate's biblical perspective. There's a lot of faith-based books, like when the heart waits, spiritual direction for sacred whatever. But you might be like, "Well, that's not for me," right? But if you go through, there's dances of anger. That's a big issue with a lot of our women, is they have a lot of anger issues. There's a lot of relationship issues, and so like Rising Strong. That's a really good book. That's very positive. That's self-esteem type stuff. And then one of the things that I did was, I used to think that yoga was kind of dumb. I used to think yoga was really kind of dumb. I didn't know too much about it. But, I started getting these books called Overcoming Yoga Through Trauma. And, one of the good programs that they had at the prison where I worked a few years ago is they actually had a program called, they actually had a program at the prison on meditation. And, meditation and yoga, they kind of go hand in hand. But, because of funding, they stopped the yoga thing, or they stopped the meditation thing. And what I noticed when they stopped the meditation is, that was probably 2-3 years ago, but you can still tell the women that went through that meditation class, because you can tell, like when we do count time and stuff, they're sitting on their beds and they're very relaxed and they're calm, and they're just, you can just tell that there's a lot of positive effects. So anyway, those are kind of some of the things, that I have on my book list. Now, most of these books are brand new, but it's kind of cool, because if you look right here, this guy right here, he donated 20 books for a yoga project for the prison, so that he wanted. This is called the women's project. It's a women's practice, healing from the heart, and it's all about yoga and prison yoga. And then somebody else sent a book right here. It's on studying for cosmetology, And then I had an inmate that, somebody gave me a copy of Rebecca Bender's book called The Roadmap to Redemption. And the inmate, she's a survivor, and she's been in prison for probably 15 years. And the woman said that, hey, I'd really like to start like a little Bible study for some of the other inmates that are sex trafficking survivors, because there's a lot in the prison. And she wanted to start one for some of the younger inmates. And so she said, I'd like to get a whole bunch of those. And so I wrote somebody, like I think it was her publisher or whatever, and they said, well, here, let me send you a whole bunch of these, and let me know if you need more. And these were donated by Exodus Cry, and they're a group out in Kansas City, and they had a pretty good, and so I really can't thank these people enough, And so this is kind of like the front page of my book. See, I have the website. If you want to go to the website is johnomeekins.com, and like I say, it's johnomeekins.com, and I'll link that on my website. But it's I just call it the Florida Women's Prison Library Book Project. And so if you go down, if you really can't afford like an Amazon book or something like that, and you just maybe you have some really decent books, and I don't want like really beat up, 1960s terrible, books, but if you have some like pretty good books, you can send them to John Meekins, Florida Women's Prisons Book Project, and it's 588 Fairways Lane, and it's Suite 104, E104, and it's Ocala, Florida. And so you can send them directly to that suite, and I'll make sure that they get to the right people. And so, like I say, I just want people to, really reach out, and maybe if you have a group like a church that wants to get involved, this would be a really good project. For women's groups. Now, some of the other things that I've been working on, a lot of these women, when they get out of prison, they have a really hard time getting a job because they're felons, and there's not a whole lot of things that they can do where they can actually get a decent job. But one of the they have a couple, they do have a couple projects, programs that are pretty successful with the women where I work. And there's a couple areas where they can actually get decent jobs once they're out of prison. But like one of the things that they have is they have like a culinary arts program. Now the culinary arts program is really successful. The woman that runs it, she's really fantastic. She does a great job with those people, with the inmates. And she's very Christian, and she motivates them and she inspires them. And a lot of the people that are at that prison, the staff members, they think, wow, she's doing a great job. But the fact is there's no funding for her stuff. The materials that she has, the freezers and stuff, they're in like an old chow hall. And so it's just like really dilapidated. And, you want to speak about your sponsor donating to books? I'm sponsored by Single Mother's Guide to Raising Black Boys. Wow, okay, Amelia. That's great. You can put that on my, link that on my thing, on the comment section on my book. But one of the things that I really think that would help some of these women is I think that the business community needs to step up. I know that there's a lot of groups out there. There's plenty of groups out there that that could maybe approach like your local prison or something like that. And like I know that like in Florida, there's big on restaurants, and so like this woman where I work, she's dealing with these ovens and stuff that are like 1940s, and they're just like put together with bubble gum, and they just don't work half the time. But so I was thinking, the business community is really not aware, but they could probably get involved by maybe when a restaurant gets rid of like some of their equipment and they upgrade to brand new equipment, maybe they some of their associations could get involved and maybe donate some of their old ovens, even though they might be old ovens to them. They might be like a 5-year-old oven, and maybe they're getting a brand new oven. Well, the ones at the prison that the inmates are having to learn on, the prisons the ones at the prisons, they're like 40 years old, and half the time they don't work, and that sort of thing. So one of the things that I've been doing is I've been looking to engage with like some restaurant associations and maybe some equipment suppliers. You know, there's some like groups that like there's like businesses that own, you know, like multiple, like the Darden Group, for instance. You know, I'm not trying to throw them out under the bus, but you know, there's some associations that have a lot of they just have a lot of maybe members, and maybe they have some associations, and they could probably donate some of the old equipment that would be like practically new to some of the prison, and you know, these women would have upgraded equipment to use. And then, you know, it would be kind of neat, because maybe when these women get out and they get jobs at these get jobs, you know, that's hard, that's part of the thing with reentry, and just, you know, having these people not have to go back to that boyfriend that's going to beat the crap out of them. You know, it's just it's a key issue, is just employment. So if we can get some of these women to get their GEDs, and we can get their employment up, right, their skills, and you know, so we got the books for the GEDs. Now we need to get, you know, maybe some of the businesses to come on board and say, hey, we're going to make sure that you know, your inmates and the women in your prison are working with top-notch equipment, so that way when they get out and they come to work for us, we don't have to train them all over again on using the equipment, because they've been using it for a long time, and maybe they know how to do all the settings and that sort of thing. So it just seems like, to me, it's like a genius type, you know, it's a win-win for everybody. Now, you know, some of the people are like, well, we don't, and so what it does is it takes away the, you know, the funding question for the criminal justice system. So if you're, it doesn't, you know, like I say, it doesn't matter what prison system you're in, but you know, it's always, oh, we don't have the money, we don't have the money. But you know, if it's free, you know, if you got some really good companies and some maybe some deep pocket associations out there, or you got somebody that's like some big restaurateur, you know, and he's got a lot of money, or you know, and all of a sudden, you know, he could, you know, he's got like 6 restaurants or something, he could donate some of that stuff, or you know, somebody generous, or maybe, you know, in addition to the person that's generous, maybe they could come out and they could maybe do a little training class once a week for these students in this class, and really show them how to like really, you know, make some awesome stuff. You know, and I'm talking like, you know, like maybe somebody from like some cooking channel would come out, and like a celebrity chef could come out like once a month or something. And then what would really be neat is if, you know, they could get some kind of a certification. And then, you know, so when you have some of these women that are maybe trafficking survivors, you know, whether they've been exploited one way or another, you know, what it does is it just it takes away one of the elements that these traffickers need to control these women, which is what? Exploitation, as far as, you know, employment. And it gives them independence to where, hey, you know, if you don't want to have to make money, if you don't want to have to go strip to make money, you don't have to strip. You can go work in a restaurant and you can make $20 an hour, you know, making stuff and working in the kitchen. And, you know, then you don't have to be exploited, and you're not having to do that stuff. Now you got your own money, right? So that's just kind of one of the things that I've been looking at, you know, is, and, you know, another area that I've been thinking about is, you know, cosmetology. I see Amy's on there, and she was talking about how successful cosmetology was for her, you know, in her book. She has a really good book, by the way. It's, what's the name of your book, Amy? It's what? From Privilege to Prison? Let me pull it up real quick. Hold on. Amy and I, we're pretty good friends. I'll show you her book. Let me see, hold on. I'll show you Amy's book real quick. 1 second. I'm going to put my thing down real quick, and I'll show you what her book looks like. Anyway, I'm back. Sorry about that. Let me see. Amy, she's on my thing here, my feed. And if you look on my, she's an activist in Columbus, Ohio, and I met her a couple times, and she's pretty funny. And I'm going to try to show you her book, because she's got a really, you know, she's an activist for women, that, or for, you know, former inmates to get out of prison. me see if I can find her book here. Anyway, yeah, this is her book, and yeah, you can buy it on paperback, and yeah, she wrote a pretty good book, and I've been reading it. You know, I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I'm like about halfway through it. But this is a really good book that I recommend that you try, and it's called From Privilege to Prison. You know, finding a purpose in a dark place. And her name is Amy Wicks Passamore, and you'll see that she's on my Facebook page, and she posts a lot of stuff. She has her own little group now. It's called In the Name of Justice, and yeah, when I go to Ohio and stuff, it's really funny because all of a sudden she's like, hey, you really need to come hang out with me, and I'll introduce you like all these really neat people. And so next thing I know, she's introducing me to prosecutors and judges and stuff, and my mother, she's like, well, you know, you need to make an appointment with some of these people, and then that way you can go talk to them. It's like, hey, Mom, I don't need an appointment. I got Amy. That's all I need to get in the door. But anyway, you know, she's involved in a lot of the same things that I am as far as, you know, the reentry stuff and people staying out of prison. So you might want to check out her webpage. But some of the other things that I've noticed over the years is a lot of prisons, they give access to inmates. You know, these pimps, they're free to just walk right up into the prison for some reason. And one of the ways that traffickers get access to inmates is they do these pen pal things, and there's these pen pal websites, and I'd like to show you one that's pretty popular, and it's called paperdolls.com, and what they do is, you know, women can like post ads online. And now you're sitting there thinking, you know, well, what are the women doing with access to the internet? They don't actually get access to the internet. What they're doing is, you know, they can mail in their pictures, and they can mail in an ad, and they can do it with stamps. Now, one of the things that you can do is you can look at these women, and you can look at, I'll show you how it works. You can look at this website, right? It's called Prison, you know, Women in Prison. And so you can look at them by age and by state. And there's an application, and so people are like, well, how is she able to go on the internet and do advertising? Well, anyway, she doesn't really have to go on the internet, but, you know, they just mail in the application, and it shows you, hey, you know, the application is $10, or you can do 25 first-class stamps, you know, so that's how, and then, you know, so that's how they pay. So anyway, I just wanted to show people that, you know, these are kind of some of the ways that women get, you know, they post their ads online, right? And then, but most states, they don't allow, it's against state laws, you know, it's against the regulations for a lot of these states, for these women to actually post the internet, you know, ads on the internet. And what you're going to see is, you can see by like certain states, you know, the states that actually enforce, you know, some of these regulations, like, you know, like I just went on, just by accident, you know, I just went on, like, I just went on Idaho, right? And if you go on Idaho, you can see that, yeah, there's like one page, and there's probably, or two pages, and there's like probably 20 people on a page. And a lot of times there's a lot of fraud involved in these. But like if I want to click on this is like Stephanie, and you can kind of see what she looks like, and you can see her age, and and a lot of times it'll show that her projected out date is 12/17, and, you know, this is her address, and this is who she likes to write, and then it talks about, you know, you will not be disappointed, you know. And so, yeah, she might just be like looking, most of the time they're looking for, like, we call them sugar daddies. They're looking for people that maybe they can just get a lot of money out of. And you know, when you think about it, you know, what do these guys really want? And then, so you go to different states, and there's like there's almost no ads. Like, this is Arizona, and there's like just one page of ads. And so you can tell that, you know, Florida really doesn't, or that Arizona, for instance, you know, they don't really put up with too many ads, the inmates advertising. But if you go to other states, like if you go to like Florida, for instance, I'm just giving an example, you know, if you look, there's like about 20 ads per page, and they got like 13 pages of advertisements. You know, inmates doing personal ads. And yeah, this isn't any knock on Florida, but you know, if you look, and it's just like all these women, and you know, they're putting all these ads on there, and then you click on the ad, and then yeah, it's like all these little sexy pictures of themselves, and you know, it's just you know, and it gives their addresses, and some of them are, you know, they do these, some of them will say, hey, you know, I get out pretty soon. And, you know, whenever I get out, it'll be great because then we'll be able to have all kinds of, you know, we'll be able to have all kinds of wonderful and stuff like that. And so you get like these 65-year-old guys and they're sitting there like, wow, you know, this girl really loves me. And when I get out, you know, I'm going to have like, it's going to be like a sexual Disneyland with her. But then on the other hand, sometimes the guys that are going on these sites, they're actually pimps. And they're actually not the kind of people that you would really want, you know, picking up an inmate. And so, you know, that's one of the ways, you know, people say, well, what are these guys getting access? How are they getting access to these women? And so, you know, what they'll do is they'll just start putting money on their books and that sort of thing. And then when they get out, you know, it's kind of like, well, you know, there's an obligation, you know, like there's a debt obligation to pay this off, right? So anyway, some of the things that I do is I do a lot of training, and I'm involved in a lot of groups. So anyway, I'd just like to point out some of the groups that I really like, just in case anybody's interested. One of my favorite organizations, and they're the ones that really kind of got me started in human trafficking, along with, you know, the International Association of Human Trafficking Investigators, and that's Shared Hope. And let me show you their website. Is Shared Hope, and this is like, they're like a really good organization, and you can kind of look at their resources, and it shows you how to get involved. Some people say, hey, I want to know how I can get involved. What can I do? Right? And anyway, you can like go to their website, and you can like download these little videos, like Chosen film, like the Chosen videos, and you can kind of take these and you can buy one for like, you know, I'm not sure how much they are. They're just like different prices. And they're pretty affordable, and you can take it and you can show it at your church, or, you know, maybe like a church group. They have a book here called Renting Lacey that's pretty popular, so you can buy that, you know. And then what it does, then what they also do is they also talk about, you know, they grade your states, you know. They like, and so they do a lot of stuff with training and awareness. So let me show you the training part. So like if you wanted to have somebody come out and talk to your group or a church, you can call them, and they have people, they're called ambassadors of hope, and that's kind of what I do on the side. You know, I'm just, you know, you take a little class and you can come out and they'll train and they'll talk to you guys. If you want to know maybe some definitions of sex trafficking, you know, this is kind of the definitions of trafficking. This is like the this is the definition of sex trafficking. And it occurs when someone is forced, when someone uses force, fraud, or coercion to cause a commercial sex act, you know, with an adult or a minor. And then, but, you know, a lot of times, if there's a minor involved in a sex act, you don't have to have fraud, force, or coercion. You know, it's just there. And then, you know, and then there's, you know, so then there's, you know, a lot of different types of trafficking. There's labor trafficking type stuff. And this website, like I say, they have a lot of policy tools where you can actually look and you can see like they'll grade states. Certain states have certain policies on human trafficking and stuff like that, and some of them stink. And they'll call your state on the carpet. You know, if your state's got really weak laws, they're gonna say, hey, you know, you need to do something about this. Another really good website that I like, and I don't really recommend calling their phone number. Hold on. Is the Polaris Project. And, let me see. Hold on, let me find this website real quick. Let me put my computer down. Alright, so here's the Polaris Project. I'm going to show you their website a little bit and kind of what's there. um, let's see. This project right here, they do a lot of human trafficking resource type stuff. If you like need resources or you want to find out about something, if you want to find out about healthcare workers, your role in identifying human trafficking, if you're working with survivors and you need support, that's pretty cool. But and another thing that they do is they advertise they do a lot of advertising with the National Human Trafficking Hotline phone number, and it's called the National Human Trafficking Resource Center Hotline. Um, and then also, it's kind of important to a lot of people, if they're in a bad situation, they can't maybe pick up a phone and start talking, but maybe they have a phone and they want to text. A lot of kids are into texting now. And so people are more interested in texting. So, texting is really kind of a cool way for these people to get in touch with maybe services and help because, they don't want to talk to somebody. But, and then, you start looking at some of their support. And then this is like a map of the country where, this shows a map where, all the people in the country, this shows, this is, hold on. I guess this map is not that good, but there's a map that shows you where all the sex trafficking calls come from, in the United States, and you can see like in the red spots and stuff like that. That's where they get the most calls from. But anyway, those are just kind of some of the things that you can do that we do as far as trafficking and some of the resources that are out there. And I really highly suggest that, if you want to get involved in this, it's a big problem in this country. Then, it's not just people being flown in from Europe or Asia or something like that. A lot of times it's minors that are, it's American men having sex with American kids. And so, and what's really kind of funny, what's really kind of odd about that is they're local. Local men want to have sex with local kids, and the reason is because they want to avoid crossing state lines, because when you start crossing state lines, that's when the FBI gets involved. So that's one of the things that they really want to, that's why they do that. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now, but I'm going to try to come back maybe a little later, and maybe I can cover some more things. And if you guys want to email me, my email address is jomeekins@comcast.net. That's J-O, that's the initial O, meekins@comcast.net. If you go to my website, it's johnomeekins.com, and I'll put a link on there, and that's where you can find, more about the book project and how you can donate and that sort of thing. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate if you might share my book project on your websites, maybe your group sites, because that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because it's really a big issue with women getting out of prison so that they don't have to go back to the life. And so I'm going to sign off for now, and I really appreciate it if you come back and see me again. Thank you.